The reception hall sparkled with fairy lights strung across exposed wooden beams, casting warm shadows on the cream-colored tablecloths. My mother's heavy perfume filled the air around our table, that same overpowering floral scent she'd worn my entire life, making it impossible to breathe when she leaned too close. She'd insisted on sitting at the head table despite my careful seating arrangements, her rehearsed smile fixed in place as she surveyed the reception like she'd personally orchestrated every detail. My sister Ashley had been working the room for the past hour, showing anyone who would look at her phone screen the photos from her Florida vacation last month. 5 days in Orlando with her boyfriend Tyler, staying at a mid-range hotel near the theme parks. She'd mentioned the cost exactly 32 times since arriving at the venue. $3,000 for the whole trip, she kept saying. Tyler really knows how to plan a getaway. I'd said nothing. I'd learned by age 14 that responding only validated their need for attention. Daniel, my husband of 3 hours, kept his hand intertwined with mine as we sat at the head table. His father William stood near the microphone, waiting for the best man to finish his toast. At 59, William carried himself with the quiet confidence that comes from building a successful civil engineering firm from the ground up. He wore his authority easily, never needing to announce it. The best man finished his speech to polite applause and laughter. The room settled into that expectant silence that comes before the parents' toasts. William stepped up to the microphone, champagne glass in hand, his silver hair perfectly styled. "I'll keep this brief," William said, his deep voice carrying easily across the reception hall without needing amplification. "Daniel and Sarah, watching you two together has been one of the great joys of Margaret's in my life." Margaret, Daniel's mother, smiled from her seat, elegant in her navy dress. She'd welcomed me into their family with a warmth I'd never experienced from my own mother. No conditions. No comparisons. No subtle competitions. "We wanted to do something special for you both," William continued. "Something that would give you memories to last a lifetime. So Margaret and I established a honeymoon fund in your names. $30,000, deposited into the travel account Daniel told us you'd opened together last month." The words hung in the air like champagne bubbles catching light. $30,000. Travel account. In your names. Already deposited. Ashley's phone screen went dark mid-swipe. Her $3,000 Florida vacation suddenly looked like a weekend trip to a nearby city. Her mouth opened then closed. Tyler shifted uncomfortably beside her. My parents exchanged panicked looks across the table. My father's champagne glass stopped halfway to his lips. My mother's carefully applied lipstick seemed too bright suddenly, a slash of red against her paling face. "What fund?" my mother whispered, but her voice carried in the momentarily silent room. I took a calm sip of my champagne. The bubbles tasted like freedom. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table, steady and reassuring. William looked genuinely confused by my mother's question. "The honeymoon fund Margaret and I set up for Sarah and Daniel. We transferred the money 3 weeks ago." Daniel didn't mention it. 3 weeks ago. Before the wedding. In an account with both our names. An account my parents didn't know existed. An account they couldn't access. "No," my mother said, her voice strained. She turned to look at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Something between panic and calculation. "Sarah, when did they give you this money?" "They didn't give it to me," I said calmly. "They deposited it into our joint travel account. Daniel and I opened it specifically for honeymoon expenses. Our joint account. Our travel expenses. Our honeymoon. Not family money. Not funds subject to discussion or redistribution. Ours." My father found his voice. $30,000 seems extraordinarily generous for a honeymoon. "Sarah, you should have mentioned such a substantial gift to your family." "Why?" Daniel asked, his voice pleasant but with an edge. "Sarah is an adult. We're married now. Our financial arrangements aren't family business." William continued, seemingly oblivious to the tension or perhaps skillfully ignoring it. "Margaret and I did quite a bit of research. We know you two were looking at that 3-week trip through Japan. The traditional ryokans, the bullet train pass, the private guide in Kyoto. This should cover everything comfortably." 3 weeks. Traditional ryokans. Private guide. Each detail was a contrast to Ashley's Orlando vacation, her chain hotel, her 5-day budget trip. "You're going to Japan?" Ashley's voice came out higher than normal. For 3 weeks. That's the plan, I said, taking another sip of champagne. 3 weeks, my mother repeated. Sarah, that's an excessive amount of time for a honeymoon. What about your job? I have 4 weeks of vacation saved, I replied. I'm using 3 for the honeymoon and saving 1 for Christmas. 4 weeks of vacation. The unspoken message was clear. I'd been working as a financial analyst for 6 years, climbing steadily, earning and saving vacation time. While Ashley had cycled through 7 jobs in the same period, never staying anywhere long enough to accrue substantial benefits. The travel agent we connected you with, Margaret added, joining the conversation, she's wonderful. She put together an itinerary that includes everything on your wish list. The cherry blossom viewing in Kyoto, the onsen experience in Hakone, that Michelin-starred kaiseki restaurant in Tokyo you mentioned. Travel agent. Itinerary. Wish list. Margaret had been paying attention during our family dinners, when I'd mentioned the travel blogs I followed, the dream destinations I researched. She'd taken notes. Made plans. Turned my dreams into funded reality. My mother's champagne glass trembled slightly. You're using a travel agent? Sarah, you've always been so practical. So budget conscious. This doesn't sound like you. Maybe you don't know me as well as you think, I said quietly. The words landed like stones in water. Ripples spread across my mother's face as she processed what I'd said. The implication was clear. She'd constructed an image of who she thought I was, practical, budget-conscious, willing to sacrifice, and had never bothered to check if that image matched reality. William raised his glass. To Daniel and Sarah. May your journey through Japan be everything you've dreamed of and more. The room erupted in applause and raised glasses. The photographer captured the moment. William beaming. Margaret smiling warmly. Daniel kissing my cheek. And at the edge of the frame my parents' faces, masks cracking. Ashley stood abruptly. I need some air. She grabbed her phone and purse, Tyler trailing behind her looking confused. Through the windows I could see her pacing in the garden area, gesturing animatedly while Tyler nodded. My father cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. William, Margaret, that's very generous. Though I do think such substantial financial gifts should perhaps be coordinated with the bride's family. We would have liked to contribute as well. We'd be happy to have your contribution, William said mildly. Daniel and Sarah's account is still open if you'd like to add to it. The invitation was perfectly polite. Perfectly devastating. Because everyone at the table knew my parents wouldn't contribute. Couldn't contribute. Not without admitting they'd never even considered funding our honeymoon. We've already contributed, my mother said defensively. We hosted the rehearsal dinner last night. The rehearsal dinner. 40 people at a mid-tier Italian restaurant. My father had negotiated the prix menu down to the cheapest options. My mother had complained about the cost for 3 months. They'd spent maybe $3,000 total. $3,000. The same amount Ashley spent on Florida. While Daniel's parents had just announced $30,000 for our honeymoon. That was lovely, Margaret said graciously. The chicken marsala was delicious. The chicken marsala. The cheapest entree option. Margaret's compliment was kind, but everyone heard what she didn't say. I'd learned something important during my 3 years with Daniel. I'd learned what generosity looked like when it came without strings. What parents who wanted their children to experience joy looked like. What unconditional support looked like. Margaret had asked me once, about a year into my relationship with Daniel, why I seemed surprised when she asked about my work. Not to compare me to Daniel or judge my choices, but genuine interest in what I did every day. I'd brushed it off, but she'd pressed gently. Over coffee that afternoon I told her about growing up invisible. The daughter who got good grades and needed no help and therefore received no attention. The one whose accomplishments were minimized while Ashley's mediocrity was celebrated as finding her authentic path. Margaret had listened without interrupting. When I finished she'd simply said, "That must have made you feel very alone." No one in my family had ever acknowledged my loneliness. They'd rewritten history so thoroughly that they genuinely believed they'd treated both daughters equally. 2 weeks later, Daniel had suggested we open a separate savings account for our future honeymoon. Not immediately, he'd said. Just something to plan for. A dream fund. He'd casually mentioned it to his parents during Sunday dinner. William had asked questions. Where would we want to go? What would we want to experience? What would make the trip meaningful rather than just expensive? I talked about Japan. The culture. The attention to detail. The way tradition and modernity coexisted. The temples and the technology. The careful beauty of everything from gardens to train stations. William had listened. Margaret had taken notes on her phone. Neither had promised anything. But I'd seen something pass between them, a silent communication that comes from 35 years of marriage. 3 weeks before our wedding, Daniel had received a text from his father asking for our new account information. The money had been transferred that afternoon. No ceremony. No announcement. Just quiet, effective generosity. Till now. Until William's public toast made it impossible for my parents to later claim the fund had been intended as a family resource or suggest I should share it with Ashley. The band started playing again, reading the room's need for distraction. Guests returned to their conversations and cake. But at our table, the silence stretched uncomfortably. Japan is very expensive, my father said, trying a different approach. Even with 30,000, you'll need to be careful about your spending. I could help you create a budget. Make sure you're being smart about this. We have a budget, Daniel said. The travel agent worked with us to allocate the funds appropriately. Transportation, accommodations, meals, activities, emergency cushion. It's all planned out. All planned out. Without my father's input. Without his control. Without his opportunity to suggest that maybe we should spend less, save some, perhaps give some to Ashley who'd really love to see Japan someday too. Sarah's always been a planner, my mother said, her voice tight. Very independent. Sometimes too independent for her own good. I don't think you can be too independent, Margaret said mildly. Financial independence is important. Especially for young women. The emphasis on financial independence hung in the air. My mother had been a stay-at-home mom who'd never had her own bank account, who'd been entirely dependent on my father's income, who'd used that dependence to justify controlling everything else in the household. Ashley returned from outside, her eyes red. Tyler had his arm around her shoulders. She slid back into her seat without looking at anyone, phone face down on the table. Her Florida vacation photos, which had seemed so impressive an hour ago, now felt like something to hide. When do you leave? William asked, effectively changing the subject while keeping it on our honeymoon. 2 days after we get back from our mini-moon, Daniel replied. We're spending 3 nights at that bed and breakfast in Mendocino this week, just to decompress. Then Japan next month. Mini-moon. A short trip now followed by the big trip later. 2 honeymoons. The luxury of choice. The abundance of options. A mini-moon and a honeymoon? Ashley's voice cracked slightly. That's... She didn't finish. Couldn't finish. Because any word she chose would reveal her jealousy or sound bitter. Practical, I finished for her. We both need to decompress after the wedding planning. But we couldn't get 3 weeks off work on short notice. So we split it up. Practical. I'd used my mother's favorite word to describe me. But I'd redefined it. Practical now meant strategic planning for maximum happiness, not self-sacrifice for others' benefit. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of dances and cake and well wishes. My parents left early, claiming fatigue. Ashley and Tyler followed shortly after. None of them said goodbye directly to us. They simply disappeared the way they'd always made me feel, invisible until they needed something from me. But I wasn't invisible anymore. I was standing at my wedding reception in a dress I'd chosen, wearing shoes I'd picked, celebrating a marriage to a man from a family that saw me clearly. And in 4 weeks I'd be in Japan, staying in ryokans, riding bullet trains, eating kaiseki dinners, living dreams I'd never spoken aloud at home because I'd learned they'd either be dismissed or claimed by Ashley as her dreams too. We honeymooned in Mendocino first. 3 nights of coastal fog and wine country and complete silence from my family. No texts. No calls. No requests for photos or updates. They were processing, I realized. Recalibrating. Trying to figure out how to interact with this version of me who had resources they couldn't control. Japan was everything I'd imagined and more. The ryokan in Hakone where we wore yukatas and soaked in private onsen baths. The temple in Kyoto where cherry blossoms fell like snow. The robot restaurant in Tokyo that was gloriously absurd. The tiny bar in Osaka where the chef prepared sushi for only 8 people per night and knew our names by the second course. We didn't post photos on social media. We didn't send updates to anyone except William and Margaret, who'd asked us to let them know we'd arrived safely. We simply existed together, experiencing beauty and strangeness and joy. When we returned, tanned and exhausted and happy, there was a message from my mother. Just one line: "Hope you had a nice trip." A nice trip. $30,000. 3 weeks. 23 cities. 16 train rides. 12 ryokans. 8 Michelin-starred meals. And she called it a nice trip. I didn't respond for 3 days. When I finally replied, I said simply, "It was extraordinary. Thank you for asking." Extraordinary. Not nice. Not fun. Extraordinary. The word choice was deliberate. I was done minimizing my experiences to make others comfortable. Ashley sent me a message 2 weeks later. A photo of a Japan travel guide with the caption, "Maybe Tyler and I will go someday. Maybe. Someday." The language of dreams deferred and resentment barely contained. I didn't respond at all. William and Margaret have dinner with us every Sunday now. We show them photos from Japan and tell them stories about the places their generosity let us experience. They listen with genuine interest, asking questions, remembering details. Margaret keeps a travel journal for us, writing down the stories so we won't forget them years from now. My mother calls occasionally. Brief conversations about weather and neutral topics. She never asks about Japan directly. Never mentions the honeymoon fund. She's learned finally where the boundaries are. I learned something important at my wedding reception. I learned that some families give freely, wanting nothing but your happiness in return. That generosity can be public without being performative. That protection sometimes looks like a father announcing a gift in front of 200 witnesses, making it impossible for anyone to later claim that gift should be shared or redirected or controlled. The wedding photos hang in our living room. There's one the photographer captured perfectly. William at the microphone, glass raised. Margaret smiling. Daniel kissing my cheek. And in the background, barely visible but undeniably present, my parents' faces showing the exact moment they realized I'd built a life they couldn't touch. A life funded by people who chose to see me. Who asked what I dreamed of and then helped make those dreams real. Who gave without conditions or expectations or strings. I keep the travel journal from Japan on our coffee table. Sometimes my mother's eyes drift to it when she visits. She never asks to look inside. She knows, I think, that those pages contain a story about the daughter she never really knew. The one who dreamed of cherry blossoms and bullet trains and kaiseki dinners. The daughter who found a family that asked about her dreams instead of telling her to be more practical. More budget conscious. More willing to sacrifice her joy for someone else's comfort. I'm not that daughter anymore. I'm the woman who went to Japan. Who stayed in ryokans. Who lived extraordinarily. And I'm finally completely free.